This podcast is a work of historical interpretation. While we strive for accuracy, some aspects of history are open to interpretation and debate. Thank you for listening. Today's episode is called Operation Plowshare, Blasting Through the Atomic Age.
Yay.
Why do you say yay like that? It should be yay!
I'm happy about the atomic age.
In the aftermath of World War II, the world stood at the precipice of a new era, one defined by the immense power of the atom. While nuclear weapons had demonstrated their devastating potential in warfare, a movement emerged to harness this power for peaceful purposes. This vision gave birth to Operation Plowshare, a U.S. program aimed at exploring the use of nuclear explosions for large-scale civil engineering projects.
Yay.
Nothing to worry about here. Be fine, totally. Yep. From carving out harbors to constructing canals, the initiative sought to transform instruments of war into tools for progress. However, as we'll uncover, the path from atomic bombs to peaceful applications was fraught with challenges, controversies, and unintended consequences. Because nothing says safe like nuclear.
Yep.
So, we have a headline from the New York Times, March 13th, 1957. That headline says, U.S. unveils nuclear peace plan, atom bombs to build harbors and canals. So this was public knowledge. This was not like a secret thing. Dr. Edward Teller, a physicist, often dubbed the father of the hydrogen bomb, said in a 1960s conference, quote, "We have unleashed the atomic genie. It is now our responsibility to direct its power towards creating, not just destroying. Imagine building a canal across a continent in a week," unquote. We're very invested in canals, apparently, in the 50s and 60s. I thought that was more of like an 1800s thing.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice if it would have been trains.
I even have a declassified memo excerpt, from 1958.
Oh, redacted.
No, it's
yes.
been declassified.
That doesn't mean that it's not redacted still. I'm sure there's stuff that's somebody took a Sharpie to.
Probably. This says initial yields from peaceful nuclear excavation tests show potential for cost savings of up to 80% compared to conventional methods. Public perception remains an obstacle. Recommend increased emphasis on patriotic messaging and American technological leadership in public briefings. Like how to get around people being afraid of nuclear. I don't know why people would be afraid this shortly after World War II.
I don't know.
I don't know. No, I don't know. I wrote that twice. That's funny.
Oh, boy.
Operation Plowshare was launched in 1957 by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, inspired by President Dwight D. Eisenhower's broader Atoms for Peace campaign. The name Plowshare itself was drawn from Isaiah 2:4. Quote, "They shall beat their swords in plowshares," unquote. Obviously, that's being a quote from the Bible, because that's where Isaiah is from. This emphasized transformation from destruction to creation. The program aimed to apply nuclear technology in ways that could benefit civilians by building harbors, blasting through mountains for railroads. There you go, railroads.
Oh, something useful.
Mining minerals, and even stimulating natural gas production. It was a time of profound atomic optimism, and many scientists believed that nuclear power could be repurposed to solve massive engineering challenges. Supporters believed that atomic blast would be cheaper and faster than traditional excavation, which is probably true. It's just safer.
Well,
Over 20 years, the program would eventually conduct 27 nuclear tests under civilian application protocols, while gaining both praise and mounting criticism. So what was going on around this time? This is post-World War II, the 50s, going on into the 60s. So we're dealing with the Cold War. Yes, that Cold War. The program emerged amid Cold War tensions, with the belief that demonstrating peaceful nuclear technology could show American superiority not just in arms, but in scientific advancement. Kind of like the space race, scientific advancement.
Sure.
Early conferences and white papers touted the theoretical success of using nuclear explosions to do the work of thousands of workers and machines in seconds. Proposals ranged from widening the Panama Canal, which was under the U.S. control at the time, to blasting new shipping lanes in icebound Alaska. Initial funding and public promotion gave the appearance of inevitability. Operation Plowshare was going to change the world, but cracks in that vision would soon appear. So, the nuking a harbor in Alaska, which was called Project Chariot. People knew about this. They weren't happy with it. In fact, the Anchorage Daily News had an article in August of 1960, and that stated, "Villagers protest atomic port plan, fear for land and wildlife." And probably themselves.
Yeah. Probably more so themselves, since why would they care about the wildlife or the land?
Well, a lot of the First Nation people would care. Which is actually, I have a quote from Rachel Craig, and you put elder from Pope Hope, called, quote, "They said it was for progress, but it was our fish, our land, and our children's future they were gambling with. We said no, and we kept saying no until they finally listened," unquote. So the First Nation people were like, no.
Yeah.
We don't know. In fact, there was even a memo dispersed in 1961 that talks about these Alaskan communities. It says, opposition from Native Alaskan communities has escalated. Field assessments indicate subsistence concerns are valid. Recommend indefinite postponement to avoid escalation of protest or negative media coverage. So they won. They were like, no, we're not doing that. You can't do that. So one of the most controversial early proposals under Operation Plowshare was the Project Chariot, developed in 1958 and centered around the remote Alaskan coast at Cape Thompson. The idea was to detonate 5 thermonuclear bombs along the coastline to create an artificial harbor in one of the most isolated regions of the U.S. proponents' regions. Sorry, that should be a period. The U.S. proponents from the AEC and scientists from Lawrence Livermore Laboratory believed this would demonstrate the practical use of nuclear excavation. However, as I mentioned earlier, the indigenous Inuit community of nearby Point Hope voiced fierce opposition. Their land, used for subsistence hunting and farming, would be contaminated with radiation. Because with nuclear comes radiation.
Really?
I'm not a scientist, but I know that much.
Can you explain how that happens?
I'm not a scientist, but I know radiation is bad for the body.
Yes, but how does
the land?
How does the nuclear explosion cause the radiation?
Ask a scientist.
I'm asking a teacher.
That teaches English and social studies.
It doesn't matter. You're still a teacher, so you're supposed to know everything.
The harbor itself would likely be unusable due to ice and poor access. This public outcry marked a turning point in the perception of Operation Plowshare. Had they maybe started with something else, it might have gone a little further. Who knows? Scientific assessment from biologists and environmental researchers also raised questions about the feasibility of the plan. A 1962 report detailed the lasting impacts of radioactive fallout and predicted extensive ecological damage. Protests were joined by university scientists, so it wasn't just the First Nation people, public health officials, and even some former supporters of the project. The first coordinated environmental protest in Alaska's history, led in part by Dr. Gordon Haber and activist Charles West, helped solidify the growing environmental movement in the United States, not just Alaska. In 1962, the AEC quietly, don't let them know they've won, shelved the project without detonation, though the land remained contaminated from earlier testing preparation. So they tried and they failed because people, ordinary people, stood up and said, no, not in our backyard. Just saying, the power of people's voices matters.
Oh, I thought you were quoting the Night of the Living Dead musical.
Never seen it.
It had its world premiere in Erie.
I don't do zombie stuff.
There was a song called Not in My Backyard.
Ah, okay. Okay, we are going to talk about the Sudan test next, a crater of controversy. On July 6, 1962, the U.S. conducted the Sudan test, one of the most dramatic and visible events of Operation Plowshare, set at the Nevada test site. It was an underground detonation of a 104 kiloton nuclear device that was designed to demonstrate how a single explosion could displace massive amounts of earth. So you didn't have to dig it out. You could just blow it up.
Yeah?
Instead of excavating the normal way.
But you still have to drill a big hole.
You would think, yeah. The result was the displacement of more than 12 million tons of soil, creating a crater 320 feet deep and 1,280 feet wide. The visual spectacle became symbolic of atomic ambition. The crater remains visible today and is a popular tourist attraction within Nevada's national security site. However, the environmental and human cost was substantial. The Sudan test released more radio fallout into the atmosphere, more than any other U.S. nuclear test to that point, estimated to have exposed more than 13 million Americans to radiation.
Which is bad.
According to declassified government documents and later health studies, the fallout contributed to increases in cancer risk and congenital disabilities in nearby regions. The test sparked public outcry and served as a turning point for opposition to Plowshare's methods. Many within the AEC began to question whether public support could be maintained for such operations, given the growing fear of invisible, long-lasting consequences of radiation poisoning.
Because radiation's bad.
Because, yes. So 1962, we have the Las Vegas Sun with their headline stating, "Massive Earth Blast Rattle Nevada Desert. Largest crater ever created by man." Doesn't say anything about nuclear, though, in that, right? Well, this was 1962, so yeah. First-hand account from Alice Davenport, who was a resident of St. George, Utah, recalled in a 1982 interview, quote, "I saw the sky go white, and a few days later, the sheep on our farm started dying. No one warned us. No one said we were in the path of the fallout."
Poor sheep.
Right? So Sudan fallout cloud was detected across 13 states. And another declassified memo excerpt, which I find these interesting. There is an urgent need to reassess public exposure thresholds. Like how much is okay to be exposed to. Like they need to reassess that. That's what that's saying. Recommend internal review of notification because like Alice said, nobody told her or her family that they're in the path of nuclear fallout. And evacuation procedures. This makes it sound like nobody was evacuated from the area. And that was written, it wasn't declassified, but it was written in 1963, so a year later. Like, oops.
Yeah.
Maybe this isn't a great idea?
Well, maybe not.
I mean, I like the concept of trying to turn something devastatingly bad into good. I just don't know if it's possible.
Anything's possible.
In theory. Now we have a whole section on atomic tourism. Las Vegas and the allure of the bomb. I don't really think Las Vegas needs help with tourism, but I could be wrong.
At the time.
Maybe then,
At the time,
this was 1953, so you're right. Yeah. Yep. Then, yeah, it did. Las Vegas Review Journal wrote, Vegas goes atomic, tourists line rooftop to see bomb tests. Because you're right. Like, Las Vegas that we know today, that wasn't around in the 50s.
Yeah, I know.
Like, not like it is now.
The Vegas of today wasn't even the Vegas of the 90s.
No.
Now it's horrible.
Las Vegas, situated just over 60 miles from the Nevada test site, became an unlikely epicenter of atomic tourism during the early years of the Cold War. The test attracted thousands of visitors who would schedule their trips around the explosions. So they were obviously advertising when these explosions would happen.
Yeah.
Hotels offered atomic-themed packages with rooms boasting views of the desert where mushroom clouds would rise. Iconic images of women in swimsuits posing with test site backdrops appeared in promotional materials. Downtown clubs even held Miss Atomic Bomb beauty pageants. However, as more information became available about the risk of radiation, attitudes began to shift. Fallout from above-ground tests reached Las Vegas itself, and concerns grew among residents and scientists about long-term health effects. By the early 1960s, tests were moved underground. And the city began distancing itself from its radioactive legacy. Despite the danger, some local nostalgically recalled the bomb test as our fireworks. The strange era of mushroom cloud postcards and atomic cocktails speaks volumes about the cultural naivety and optimism of the age. I worked at the Desert Inn. This is a waitress, Layla Montrose, in a 1990 oral history. She was thinking about back to the days. We had bomb-themed drinks, mushroom cloud decor, and girls in glow-in-the-dark bikinis. It sounds crazy now, but back then it was just business.
Oh, it's Fallout New Vegas. Come on.
We didn't realize the danger. Yikes. Kind of reminds me of the Radium Girls.
Kind of reminds me of a party.
Oh, gosh. Dr. Carl Sagan testified before Congress in 1974, and this is what he stated. Quote, the arrogance of thinking we can detonate nuclear weapons and walk away unscathed is not science, it's mythology. Plowshare is a warning, not a model. Unquote. Because people were starting to get nervous.
I wonder why.
Yes. And even the Washington Post stated in January of 1975, quote, nuclear earth-moving program on brink of shutdown, unquote. That was one of their headlines. Operation Plowshare's decline was gradual but inevitable. Environmental groups, newly empowered by public backlash to events like the Sudan test and Project Chariot, pressured Congress to end the use of nuclear devices for peacetime purposes. The economic cost of testing, cleanup, and the legal challenges were also increasing, while an ever-decreasing number of viable projects passed scientific or public scrutiny. Like, they weren't passing scrutiny. The energy crisis of the 1970s shifted the focus towards more sustainable technologies, and public trust in government-led science declined in the wake of the Vietnam War and, of course, the Watergate scandal. Department of Energy memo from 1976 that states Public confidence in nuclear programs continues to erode. Final cost-benefit analysis does not justify continuation. Recommend formal termination of Plowshare program to redirect resources to less controversial energy research, unquote. And that was 1976. It's a little less than 20 years.
Yeah.
Oops.
And that was almost Operation Paul Bunyan.
In 1977, under President Carter, Operation Plowshare was officially terminated. But its legacy remains. Craters like Sudan stand as reminders of human ambition and hubris. The program helped shape early environmental policy, galvanized first generation of nuclear watchdog organizations. Declassified documents and eyewitness testimony continue to provide insight into how close we came to building our infrastructure with weapons of mass destruction. Operation Plowshare remains one of the most audacious and peculiar programs in American scientific history. I had not heard of it until I was trying to find topics to talk about. I mean, this specific operation,
Don't you know your nuclear history?
Its legacy is complicated, a grand idea born of Cold War optimism, which is kind of an oxymoron, but sidelined by environmental reckoning and shifting of public values. And that happens so often in our history.
Yeah?
So often. It serves as a case study in the duality of technological ambition, the line between innovation and irresponsibility. The program's literal and figurative craters continue to spark discussion about the power of science and the importance of public scrutiny. It's kind of like, we can do it, but should we? That's the bottom line. We can do this because we are smart, advanced people, but should we? And I don't mean me, but...
Why, you don't have that punch power?
No, I do not.
Why not?
Because I am merely a teacher. As one declassified DOE memo noted, quote, "The atom is a tool like any other, but in whose hands and toward what end remains the enduring question," unquote. So the next time you find yourself standing on the edge of a canyon or watching a construction crew dig a foundation, think of the time America asked, what if we used a nuclear bomb instead? Because apparently we asked that in the 50s and 60s multiple times, because that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I guess try it. I don't, did they not know radiation was bad for them? I don't think you can even admit that. You can't even try to pull that line. There were U.S. doctors in Nagasaki and Hiroshima after those bombs. We knew, not to mention the radium girls, but that's a little
That was
different.
also an episode.
But yes, it was. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the strange and explosive history of Operation Plowshare. If you enjoyed this episode of Time Tellers, be sure to follow us. Leave us a review. If you're listening on Spotify, you just scroll up and you can type something in, and we'll see it on the episode. Let us know what else you might want to hear about.
Yeah, we know what happens when I come up with ideas.
Which are good too.
You're not supposed to lie to our listeners.
I'm not lying. I'm not lying.
Yes, you are.
Until then, remember, sometimes the most powerful stories are buried just beneath the surface. Thank you. Bye.